Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a Doctor Who episode commentary podcast all bound together by people just being nice to each other, really, and about the episodes in question, and trying to choose the best thing about each episode as we watch and commentate along to it.
Hello, Toby. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Tom, and I'm an associate professor specialising in popular music. Thanks, Toby, for the invitation to take part in the podcast. I've been a Doctor Who fan since The Invisible Enemy in 1977, and I love that the show can tell so many varied and exciting stories. At its heart, I think Doctor Who is about redemption and openness, and not judging a book by its cover. And the central message is that there's always hope, there's always a choice, and there's a chance to shape the future. Today, I'm recommending The Keeper of Traken. Let's see if Toby and I can agree on what makes the story so important and enjoyable.
Welcome, lovely listener. I'm materialising inside your control room to give you some backstory, a massive amount of backstory, before we embark upon the adventure that is The Keeper of Traken. That's Dr. Tom. Bless him, you'll have heard him already, I hope, on my Indefinable Magic podcast, during which we discussed race and Doctor Who. Tom is a very erudite commentator and has lived experience of being that rare thing, I think, probably in when he was growing up. Go back and listen to the podcast. I'll tell you all about it, of being a Doctor Who fan of colour. But Tom's great company. He's good fun. He also spoke alongside me at the Blue Dot Festival recently, and I'm always eager to get his contributions to things, partially because I like talking to him. And he's very kindly contributed here to Happy Times and Places, and we are cut from a similar cloth, because my first Doctor Who story was also The Invisible Enemy. However, unlike Tom, I am not necessarily the quickest to champion Keeper of Traken. My background with this story is that, I mean, season 18, I remember season 17 very well, and I remember season 18 really, really clearly, but I did feel at the time, alongside my excitement that this was new Doctor Who, and it was Doctor Who, and I watched Doctor Who, and Doctor Who was my favourite thing ever. I am a Doctor Who fan, so I did feel it was a bit sciencey and burgundy for me, this period of Doctor Who, and I wanted, khaki and explosions and invasions. The grass is always greener when you're a Doctor Who fan, and actually, it's not only is it greener, but the way you like the colour green that you like it is better than the colour green that other fans like it, who are wrong to think it's green in the first place. Ha ha ha! But with Keeper of Traken, I think I always felt it was a sort of story I would probably appreciate more when I got older, and certainly then when I did get older and I didn't have access to the videos, and I'd started to revisit season 18 and realised that actually, some of the productions, like Full Circle and State of Decay were really marvellous productions and very intelligent stories. I thought, well, and I'd watched a few BBC Shakespeares by this time as well. I thought, oh, well, Keeper's perhaps going to be a bit more of an elegant story, but, the atmosphere of season 18 combined with the BBC skill at Shakespearean-like productions, where, the acting and the elegance of the script will probably be what gets it over the finish line more so than other aspects, because there's a sort of shortage of monsters and things like that. I thought, it will probably appeal to me more now that I'm a bit more grown up. I'm a, grand old age of 18 or whatever. And then I watched it and actually found its staginess did it no favours, and the acting was, despite having an excellent cast on paper, was not as good as I'd sort of hoped, and so I've always found it to be a story that I've appreciated more as an idea than as an experience, and I would always put it quite low, despite my wanting to like it, quite low in my ratings of season 18, where my feeling that its ambition was not matched by its execution. However, because I'm doing this, I hadn't planned to do this. This is going to be a tedious refrain. This wasn't actually on the immediate schedule, but the other night I fancied watching a Doctor Who, and so I watched The Keeper of Traken for fun, but with an eye to going, and if I'm it might prep me to then do a more informed commentary for Happy Times and Places, and I actually really enjoyed it. So again, and it's not one that I would have sort of rushed to see, and certainly, as I say, rate in the top tier of season 18, which is a season I do respect, but again, I think sometimes more in principle than in practice. But we'll see, because actually, I love Leisure Hive. I love Full Circle particularly. I love Warrior's Gate. They've all got interesting talking points, though. But I have to say, at the time, as I say, for me as a youngster, this was new Doctor Who, so it was exciting. But I had a yearning for more sort of traditional style Doctor Who, of the kind that I read in the Target books and imagined looked like movies, which of course they didn't. But that's all part and parcel of being, of wanting what you can't have, and being frankly an ungrateful wretch, which is all part of the DNA of being a Doctor Who fan. So, not a favourite, but one that I certainly saw the merits of when I watched it for fun within the past few days. But we'll see what perhaps a recent and cautious convert like myself can find in The Keeper of Traken, and if it matches with a willing champion of it who comes from a similar time zone to myself, Dr. Tom Attah. So I want you to now sit in your throne and prepare to press play on The Keeper of Traken, which I'm going to begin in 3, 2, 1. Now, I do have memories of when this story went out, because I am that old. And I also remember a repeat of it, or catching a repeat of it, a bit of a repeat of it, at a friend's house, but that was more episode 3, or maybe episode 4. I remember the end of episode 3, but it was either the ending or it was the reprise. But I do remember bits of episode 1 and all of it on its original broadcast. So I'm not sure if I caught all of the repeat. I think we didn't necessarily know about such things. And I remember I was certainly at my friend Paul Sykes' house when I saw the repeat of episode 3. But I do remember watching these episodes as they went out, and yet I have no memory at all of this very lengthy opening. Now, sometimes I was prone to miss the beginning of Doctor Who. Winding back now, I think my family sometimes lied to me and said, it's just started, and we'd click on, and I think I'd missed the title sequence, and in fact, because I had no sense of how long time was, and I'd actually missed the first 5 or 10 minutes. That definitely happened at my Nan and Grandpop's house, because they watched, I think, Crossroads, which was on opposite, and they, frankly, who taught me right from wrong and taught me to be good. My grandmother was a Methodist and was very keen on wagging the finger and telling people to be honest. And well, they lied to me. Basically, they lied to me about me missing so that was when I stayed with them. But I remember missing, I think, bits of. But I stayed with them for bits of Kinder, and I stayed with them for bits of Time Flight. But I don't recall staying with them for any of season 18. I remember being on holiday in Cornwall and seeing a trailer for the Leisure Hive, and then I think being slightly annoyed that some of the trailer was either not in the first episode or was part of the cliffhanger. But anyway, so I have distinct memories of time and place of watching season 18, but I don't remember this opening. I don't actually, and I remembered Luvic, I remembered him as a character. I remembered, there are bits that I remember very clearly, like the conclusion to part 4. I love that season 18 has these rather moody, they look a bit hokey now, but even when I was sort of collecting sort of bootlegs, back in the day, in the 90s or whatever, I found something rather comforting and enjoyable about the TARDIS models that we have in season 18 to bridge a scene. I always found them rather elegant, and the attempt to show the TARDIS spinning in space was something that seemed part of the furniture this season, and I love that bit in Full Circle where it when it goes into E-space and we see that. But I like the attempts to have the TARDIS in flight. Tom Baker in scene with elderly actor Klaxon, which means he always gives a slightly sort of respectful smile. You could tell that Tom Baker is rather fond of Dennis Carey. He likes old people. And then he looks dead-eyed at Adric. But I don't remember the Keeper being in the Keeper of Traken. I remember, as I said, lots of stuff between Cassia and Tremas and a lot of stuff in that sort of throne room. But I don't remember the Keeper being in the Keeper of Traken. I remember being quite surprised that he was a character. But so I might have missed some of the openings of these stories. I might have just forgotten them. Do you know what I mean? Or forgotten certain aspects. But it's a good makeup that Dennis Carey, Professor Chronotis, has, having been. I mean, he would have been in Doctor Who not that long ago. The final story of the previous season, but as it was not broadcast, there was space to cast him again. Pennant Roberts cast him in Sharda, and then cast him again in not a great part as the old man in Time Lash. So this is probably the best part that he has broadcast, although his best part is Chronotis. He was a stage director as well, Dennis Carey. He directed some Shakespeare at the Ludlow Festival. But I like this idea of the evil just shrivel up and died. That's perhaps why I never went there. I do like this idea of it's quite a poetic idea. I think that's what I enjoy about, because we think of season 18 as the science season, but actually what people don't discuss when they talk about Christopher H. Bidmead is actually, if you think of some of the dialogue given to the Castrovalvans, for example, he's not without poetry, and I think there's a sort of elegance to season 18 that counterbalances the sort of grey maths, and I'm grateful to it because I'm not really a maths waller, but I will forgive a story for being not action-packed if it aims for a certain sort of elegance and beauty, and I think that's what the Keeper of Traken aims for. As I say, in previous viewings, I felt it sort of fallen short because it's been a bit sort of too stagey and clunky, or the staginess is not quality staginess enough. I don't mind stagey so long as it is staginess that fits on the television screen. And there are aspects here that I think don't quite, and I'm perplexed as to why they don't. But we'll talk about them. But I like this idea that a creature of evil can arrive on this nice planet and not be killed, but just be left to calcify, and in their in the morality of this nice place, they get there's stuff to examine there, because you go, well, actually, wouldn't it be less cruel to sort of put something down than just sort of let it waste away over time? But there are some contradictions within the purity of the Traken Knights and their universal view of themselves. But that's okay. I think some of that might be deliberate, but some of it is not. Some of it is expedient. But nonetheless, I appreciate aiming for this idea of a tranquil planet that has worked out a system where goodness, in inverted commas, is the norm, and evil, in inverted commas, finds the ground not fertile for it to prosper in, which means that this is quite a sort of slow invasion, as it were, because we have that lovely scene of the young Cassia, which is well done because you use the same actress, but you don't do any close-ups. I'm sure she's a little bit made up, but and I think because we haven't seen her as a grown up yet, you get the idea that that's the younger Cassia, and now that she's a grown up, and that gives you a feeling that this planet has a history, that it has a wider society beyond the few small rooms in the grove that we see. And even though he's addressing the Trakenites, he's addressing a room with about 12 extras and 3 speaking actors or whatever. But that's always a task with Doctor Who, to suggest a whole planet in just a number of rooms, and sometimes it doesn't bother. Sometimes I think it is symbolic. It's saying these are all the people that we need to know. It is like a sort of play in that way as well, a little bit sometimes. But I can see why this might look absurd to a modern viewer who would go, why are they, why is this planet actually essentially 3 or 4 buildings and 24 people? But I always think that it's that it is slightly symbolic, that you have to tell a story of a planet on a smaller scale, and through representative characters. And actually this society has, for this style of programming, been thought through rather rigorously, which I like. And we have a wedding. I like the fact that Tremas is slightly pissed, but just because people do get slightly. Sarah Sutton's beautiful, isn't she? And what a lovely close-up that is to sort of introduce her. And I was very pleased when Nyssa returned in Logopolis, because I had sort of fallen for her. Bear in mind, I was 6, so I didn't know about lust or anything like that. But Nyssa would have been my pin-up, I guess, or whatever the 6-year-old equivalent is. It's an excellent make-up for Carey, and when you think of him as Chronotis, I think it is a very different sort of performance. He's a really good actor, and I'm wondering if he had to shave his beard off in order to have that latex and false beard attached. And I've only ever seen Dennis Carey as a bearded man, so that would have been quite a sacrifice. Sometimes actors get paid to have haircuts and shave their beards off, or you used to in the day. Now I think they go, and you'll be okay to shave the beard off, which basically means, and we won't pay you for it. I was once on a job where an extra had his hair trimmed for a period piece, and he was getting very sort of saying, well, you didn't ask my agent about this, we'll have to get some money and all of that sort of thing. And they were just cutting my hair, and I was going, it's fine, you could do mine. But he was a wily cove of an extra who was after every penny he could get. But and who can blame him? Television productions have a lot of money. But to me, it's not really in the spirit of it. But then again, I'd work for free, and that's part of my problem. If you're a professional, you should be happy to get paid for what you do, which is being a walkover gets you nothing apart from a stupid sense of your own honour, which you can't pay the bills with. Anyway, my point is, I suspect back in the day, that sort of thing, there would be, it was part of the furniture, in the same way that you got to keep costumes as well and all sorts of stuff. There were so many perks when you were an actor back in the day. There's actually, it's nice seeing Tom Baker and Matthew Waterhouse there in those TARDIS scenes. I think they've actually got a decent rapport, despite the fact that we knew that Tom was being very grumpy with Matthew Waterhouse. Cassia's wedding theme is playing here, which is a lovely piece of music that was part of Doctor Who the Music, which was what I've mentioned before in these podcasts, was my bedroom jiggery music, one of the very few vinyls that I had, and I would play over and over again in an attempt to pretend I was enjoying listening to it. And this was the one tune on it that was really actually like a sort of tune that was even vaguely enjoyable. I like the dialogue there between Proctor Neiman and Tremas. It's always a bit odd, isn't it, seeing Anthony Ainley not playing the Master. I'm impressed by the height of Tony Burrow's sets. I mean, this is obviously stagey. This and that gobo to suggest the moonlight or whatever it is there. This is the sort of look they went for with those BBC Shakespeares, where it was obviously indoors. It was obviously an electronic studio with a multi-camera to suggest outside in the same way that handful of extras suggests the wider citizenship of Traken. But actually that's beautifully lit, that set that Cassia is in talking to Melka. And I am beguiled by the idea of the outside what we learn about it later, of this creature sort of being left there to calcify, but being tended so that it has company as it atrophies towards its ultimate cessation. I always like the Doctor going in and getting big old dusty books. That's much more interesting, isn't it, than looking at a computer data bank. And it also suggests the ancient nature of the Doctor's civilization and how long he's been doing what he's been doing. I did actually have a look at the script to see if there was a scene where this Foster was killed that had been cut, because it seems odd to have the discovery of a body without us seeing the death, even if we didn't see the perpetrator. But no, I don't think it's a missing scene, which I actually think makes it more intriguing. I think it works. It's not doing this traditional thing you would expect of Doctor Who, which is we see somebody die and then we discover the body. This is, these guys have found a body. What's going on? These are all great actors. Roland Oliver who plays Neiman, was at the Royal Exchange at the same time that I was. He was in a different show. He's also worked with Friends of Ours. I've emailed back and forth with Roland, actually, but never quite nailed him down to an interview. But he did do an interview for my friend Oliver Crocker's The Bill podcast, because he was a regular in The Bill for a bit. So I have helped, but I've never actually interviewed Roland myself. And we did share an agent at one point as well. He's had a good career, and I think he's excellent as Neiman. But I like these. I like these characters. Of course, we love John Woodnut, the Broton, and the Draconian Emperor, and the Duke of Forgill, and Hibbert, and this is his last appearance in Doctor Who as Seren, the most honourable man, I think, possibly on Traken. He's a good character, and I like their. Even though I do feel I did feel at the time there was a very burgundy hue to Doctor Who of this period. I do like that heavy velvet, those sort of rather Shakespearean costumes that they have. I wonder if it's a mistake, is that the Doctor's costume kind of echoes that, in that even though it's not velvet, it is that sort of heavy, stagey sort of construction, and of a similar colour, although they're sort of more sapphires and blues. It seems to be from the same sort of palette as Traken, the Doctor's burgundy, and of course, each new place the Doctor visits, there should be a sort of dissonance rather than a cohesiveness, or maybe there shouldn't, or maybe actually the fact that this season has a sort of unifying design feel is part of what gives it its quality. I don't know. There are advantages and disadvantages. I'm thinking out loud. That's what these podcasts are. They're a man thinking out loud. There's a lot of false beards on display, aren't there? And a lot of wigs. And a lot of heavy makeup too. But no, I do like the costumes. Tony Burrow's design is excellent. Look at the layering in that set, and how far back it seems to go. And I've been impressed with the height when they were coming out and I was talking about Cassia's wedding theme. The doors that Neiman and Tremas exited from were pleasingly high. For something that is cursed by being studio bound, it's trying its very best to escape those confines, even if, again, only symbolically. It's not bothering to say this is real, or if it is, because that's impossible. But it's doing enough to go with us, and it's really nice to look at. That sky is funny, although actually it's not a bad attempt. There's sometimes with these things, people wouldn't even bother, and they just have the whiteness of the studio and go, well, you've got to imagine the sky. At least they've given it a blue hue. And look at the size of that set, and I think the denseness of the green and the fact that they've given it that height so we get a glimpse of the sky. Because sometimes when you don't see the sky, you have to sort of go, oh, I think they're trying to tell us that we're outside. This is telling us that we're outside, even though it's clear that we're not, just because of the quality of the picture, the hue of the lighting that's in. It's impossible, and that, you know, the lack of breeze and that sort of thing. It's impossible really to make a studio seem 100% convincing outside. So what the designer has to do is go, well, I'm going to give you enough pieces of the jigsaw for you to maybe just fill in the corner bits with your own imagination. And I think Burrough, I mean, he's an Oscar-nominated designer. He's an excellent designer, and I think in creating, you know, in attempting to, this story relies on the fact that Traken has to be a special kind of place. And, you know, Traken is in the title, the unique nature of the society and its makeup, and the fact that it has this keeper business going on, and what it does, what it does with goodness and evil. You know, it's a unique creation in that sense. It's not just another planet. And so I think hard work has to be done, and I think it's very successful in that. And I have to say, I'm sure Anthony Ainley wouldn't have grown a beard like that. Well, he wouldn't. I was going to say he wasn't grey-haired either. I'm not sure he was any-haired. The Ainley pate is one of the 7 wonders of the acting world. And talking of baldness, I'm intrigued by the Fosters, because Roland Oliver as Neiman has that sort of bald patch, and you do see men who sort of bald from the crown rather than recede. But some of the other Fosters have got it as well. So is it a bit like the miners of Peladon, and is it to become a Foster, and even indeed the head Foster? Do they, like monks? You know, they sort of shave the top of your head. Is that it? But if you looked at Neiman, you just think it was a sort of natural balding. But then you look at the others, like the one that's in between Tom Baker and Matthew Waterhouse there. He's curly haired, but he's got a bald bit on the top. So, and is that, you know, follicular determinism? If you grow up to be a baldy man, you have to be a Foster. I remember actually seeing cast lists in Doctor Who magazine, and of course, because I'd remembered the story, I was going, oh yeah, I know who Luvic is, I know who Cassia is. But then it said Foster, Liam Prendergast, and I thought, oh, Foster doesn't seem like a very Traken name. I don't remember a character called Foster, because I'd forgotten that the garden tenders, everybody were called the Fosters, and it seemed a bit odd. It seemed like, you know, having characters called, you know, Flashbong and Wingwa and Floodle Noodle, and then somebody called Trevor, you know, because yeah, a surname, I suppose, but, you know, yeah, Mason, yeah, Ranquin, Hashbro, and Smith. This is nicely plotted here. I like the fact I got a bit bored when I was reading the Target books when it was a story where the Doctor turned up and was mistrusted and had to spend an episode proving that he wasn't a spy. I love the way that Luvic says, I don't understand what's going on. And I think that line is a late addition, because I was looking at the script recently. Obviously he didn't have enough to say, and so he gets these sort of rather inane lines that Robin Soanes gives a lot of character to. Beautiful lighting, that is, beautiful lighting. Good music too. But I like the fact that the Doctor, that's really good. I like the fact that the Doctor arrives here, and actually, because Tremas is such a benign character, he says, no, we'll trust you. Let's go and see the TARDIS. And you go, good. Okay, so we're going to get rid of that boring stuff where the Doctor is thought to be a spy. But then Melker makes the TARDIS disappear, and you go, no, actually, they don't want to think of the Doctor as a spy, but every piece of evidence that will prove his innocence is gradually being taken away. So that is a more artful way of creating that dynamic, which is sometimes important for a Doctor Who story, that he is not believed initially, because why would he be? Because he's a stranger and these people all know each other and he's a interloper into their affairs. So of course he's going to be the first person you distrust. But also that's a bit boring if they just distrust on sight. They need sort of evidence. And that actually, this cliffhanger, I think, is very carefully built up to, where the Doctor has been given this slightly unartful, I would say, backstory, but it's still quite fun because it's slightly different for Doctor Who, and the flashback and all of that is I forgive it because it's so unusual. Even though I think one of the reasons it's unusual is because basically it's a man arriving in a chair and giving you the exposition, but it builds up to this situation where the Doctor has been sent to help but finds it hard. Now, this relies on the Keeper not going, yeah, this is the Doctor, but there's a big stone monster in the doorway behind him. But I think Dennis Carey helps sell this because the baleful influence of Melker makes him struggle to make himself clear. So that's all down to the actor really selling that bit where in lesser hands and lesser realization, that would just be like, well, why doesn't he just say there's a big stone monster? That's the problem. I actually think that cliffhanger is really, really cleverly built up to, and could be, if they put a foot wrong at any point, slightly frustrating, of one of those just annoying bits of miscommunication. Ditto the whole, you're a spy thing. I actually think that's very elegantly done. I loved all that lighting as well, and I think the pacing of that building up to that cliffhanger, because it's a fairly traditional cliffhanger. People advance on the Doctor with guns because they think he's a bad un. It's a step away from kill them now. But I actually think that's really, every department gets that pitch perfect, that cliffhanger. So would the cliffhanger be amongst my things? Unusually, yes, and I wouldn't have said so on paper. It's not a particularly special cliffhanger, but I think credit to everybody for pulling it off in every department to the best way. John Black, the director, I had cause to talk to Janet Fielding some time ago, and she said she thought John Black was really good and should have been brought back more, but that he either stood up to John Nathan Turner or wasn't impressed by John Nathan Turner or whatever. But she felt that he should have been, he was the sort of director they should have used more. And I know that John said that he was just never asked back again after 4 to Doomsday, and he didn't quite know why. So Keeper of Traken 1, there's so much in that. I do actually quite like the fact that you've got not an unpleasant rapport between the Doctor and Adric, which history tells us is requires more acting than we might ordinarily credit either of them with. Not that Tom is a bad actor, but he's sometimes one that, if he's not so inclined, can either not hide his feelings or do something silly because he's bored. And Matthew, who I think is not the greatest actor in Doctor Who, but actually I think they've got, and we don't have many stories where it's just the Doctor and the fourth Doctor and Adric, and so I think it's quite nice to have that scene at the beginning, that quite long scene, and frequently later on long scenes between the Doctor and the companion, open brackets S close brackets, in the TARDIS. You just chuck them out now, and the new series, the post 2005 series, hasn't done that an awful lot, and I think it's one of the things that can cause problems in the original series. And when you think of things like Vengeance on Varos, when you just go, oh, just get rid of all of that. And it's one of the things that Cartmel does, isn't he? When he comes in, he says, we don't need a lot of these TARDIS scenes. Let's just get into the story. We don't need 2 or 3 establishing scenes to remind us who the regulars are and give them a bit of something trivial to argue about or whatever. But actually, I don't mind this one because it's nice to see the fourth Doctor and Adric. And I actually quite like the fact that the Keeper comes in and gives us a sense of the history, not only of Traken, but of these characters. We see Cassia as a young woman. We see the Melkur's arrival. So that suggests that we haven't just dropped in on a series of characters that exist to tell this story in the present, which is so often the case with Doctor Who, and that's reasonable enough to do. But I admire the ambition and again the elegance that suggests that there's a place has a history and that these characters were children once or what. It's just because it's quite unusual, quite offbeat for Doctor Who, and again I sort of want that if we're having a season that aspires to tell stories that have a pretense of scientific rigor and a seriousness about the science element of the show. It needs that elegance. It needs that character. It needs that colour. Otherwise, it's just like watching a grayscale abacus, and nobody wants to do that. And so, I mean, I could have picked any number of the cast as well. I think John Woodnutt is excellent. I think it's really fun seeing Anthony Ainley playing Tremas, especially because I grew up with him as the Master, and I knew I'd seen him as Tremas, but again, it wasn't what I'd sort of taken away with me from the story, and it's always a surprise that he's the main guy. Yeah, I know he'd been cast as the Master. It wasn't that he was cast as Tremas, and then they said, oh, and will we'll give this guy the Master as well. The reason he plays Tremas is because he's going to become the Master, but we are introduced to him in the chronology of Doctor Who as, the main guest star of a piece, who is the benign and nice ruler of the planet, and he does that job magnificently well. And I think that really helps then to sell just how horrible his Master is, and the fact that he's then so indelible as the Master, although he's not my favourite Master, but that's again partially maybe he was unfortunate enough to be the one I grew up with, so therefore I have to find that greener grass elsewhere. But also Delgado is so good, isn't he? But I do have a grudging affection for Anthony Ainley, and I'm intrigued by him as well. But here, as just a sort of a straight actor playing a straight benign character, he does a really good job. And and that beard that he's got, it's not just a stick, it is a stick-on beard, but the fact that they've sort of crimped it and given it some texture that it is, you'd be hard-pressed to grow that naturally, makes a virtue of the fact that everyone's wearing wigs and everyone's got false beards on. It's instead of going, let's just stick a false beard on everybody, it's let's put some effort into everybody's hair and facial hair if we're actually going to have to put false stuff on. Let's just not pop it on. Let's pop it on and do something with it, so everyone has a great sort of look, even though it adds to the staginess. But the staginess is not a mistake. It's embraced. It's deliberate. And I'm not saying they're making it deliberately stagey. What I'm saying is they're saying this is how we make television today. This is how television is made, where exteriors are sometimes represented by interior sets. We're never going to convince everybody this is 100% real. So let's make the unreality as beautiful as we can. Let's use it to give as many visual clues to help the audience fill in the rest with their imagination. So yeah, I'm not saying they're making it deliberately stagey, but what they're doing is they're not letting its staginess hold them back in terms of making it as visually sort of beautiful and ambitious as they can. They're not coy about the staginess, even though they're not necessarily deliberately doing it. They can't help but for it to be stagey, but by not being coy about it, I think they make a virtue of it. And actually, I think those sets of Tony Burrow are absolutely superb, and then some of the lighting of those nighttime scenes is also really, really excellent. So there's much love. I love some of the dialogue. I love the fact that Tremas is slightly drunk. I like that exchange between him and Proctor Neiman, where they've got some nice dialogue to wrangle, and I think the characters are all very well drawn. And I haven't even discussed the bit where I love it, where Seiron goes up to Luvic and says, oh, we've got to indulge Tremas, but it's actually a ruse to get him out of the way. And that says so much about each of the different characters, and I think John Woodnutt does it exquisitely, but it also adds to the dynamics between the characters, because you think he's going one way, and you think as a viewer, you're going, oh, is Tremas being, oh no, that Seiron is getting Luvic out of the way so he can then consort with Tremas, and that actually underscores the import of the situation, because it's too important to discuss in front of Luvic, which says something about Seiron and Tremas's bond. So you get a sense of history, you get these different levels of interaction. People aren't just piping out exposition in order to tell the audience the plot. The exposition is all sort of artfully wrought between character interactions, and I always appreciate that as a viewer and as somebody who likes watching actors, because it gives the actors slightly more to do than just say things. Sauron is manipulating that situation, but also emphasizing the trust that he and Tremas have between them, but also the danger that might be had if they're too open about this situation, which adds to the tension, which yes, helps to tell the story, but also creates atmosphere within the story. So it's layered stuff, which I think is very clever and, as I say, very artfully done. So there's a lot to be said for this, as well as the beautiful heavy velvet costumes, Cassia's wedding theme, just the height of those doors. In some episodes, the height of those doors that Neiman and Tremas come through would be enough to get a point. But I think it's called the Keeper of Traken, and I think that's important. I think Traken is probably as well thought out and a planet as the other well thought out planet. The only other really well thought out planet, well, I suppose Kaldor City is very cleverly drawn in terms of through the dialogue and the characters and interactions in the Robots of Death. But that's always a sort of noise off, whereas Traken and Peladon, the planets themselves are mentioned in the titles and are important. It's important that they have an identity and a plausible history, and the weight of everything that has gone before impacting upon what is happening in the story now. And so for me, my choice for episode 1. Now, it is contributed to, because I think everybody's working in harmony, appropriately, the costume, the set design, the music, all help to create this. But I think it's there in the script as well. And I think it's because, if there was such a thing as a tone meeting, which there wouldn't have been, but the first thing you'd say is, we need to get Traken right. Traken needs to be unique to this story, because it has this very cleverly thought out setup of the keeper that keeps watch of everything, and it being bound together by everybody being nice, and it having it's a unique creation. It's not just an other planet. Some thought has gone into what it means to be on Traken, and what that means for this story, and how that's going to help this story be told and present danger and jeopardy for the Doctor. And I think key to that is making Traken its own place. That you couldn't get a still of the design, or a shaft of the music, or a slice of the dialogue, and think you were on any other interchangeable Doctor Who planet. So I think the conception and realisation of Traken as a character within the story, and that helps with the history they got, the flashbacks, the fact that we drop in on a wedding, which I think is a lovely little touch as well. That makes Traken feel like an extra character within the show, which for this story in particular is vital to its success. So yes, Traken is my choice for number 1, which is more than a sum of its parts, but all of those parts have to be right for it to work, and I might pick some of those other parts as my favourite things for later episodes. Odd, because I mean, as I say, the Keeper of Traken is not one that's been high up on my list before, but I'm waxing lyrical, aren't I? Or just at length, you decide. You can score me for lyricism or lack thereof, but I'm certainly waxing. I've waxed so much, but both sides of my moustache are curled. But listen, or I've got a very raw bikini line. You decide what sort of waxing I'm doing, but. I am choosing the character of Traken, the conception and realisation, and just all-round sort of feel of Traken as my thing for episode 1. What is Dr. Tom going to choose?
Episode 1. The highlight of episode 1 is how the show looks and feels. Costumes, sets, music and direction combine to bring a fairy tale realm to life. Colours are rich and sensual, environments feel organic and ancient. This type of costume drama and world building is what the BBC has always done well, and it suits the once upon a time science fantasy of this story down to the ground.
The once upon a time science fantasy. I love how that is phrased. I think I might get the point for that, don't I? Although I specified it was Traken when he talked about the look and feel. I think we were talking along the same lines there. I really like the way that Tom put it. But I think we might be in accord. Do you? You decide. But let's not argue. I want this podcast to be bound together just by people being terribly nice to each other. So that's a good start for, as I say, a story that I've hitherto would be sort of and I think because it's one that people do like. I always have the need, if somebody likes something, to go, but I was doing it to my friend Joe Ford the other day when his podcast Hamster with a Blunt Penknife was full of praise for The Brain of Morbius. I was like, half a mo, because that's always also one that I felt the need to kick a little. Both studio-bound planets. Maybe I have some residual fear of planets with wooden floors. Maybe that's some hitherto bothersome presence in my subconscious. Well, maybe I need to see somebody about that. But because people have always largely been very nice about Keeper of Traken, I've always wanted to sort of point out, actually, it's not as good as the people who think it's good say it is. I actually really enjoyed that episode. I think it builds up to a brilliant climax. The cliffhanger itself could have easily been chosen. So many different aspects of the production's realization could have been chosen. I was spoilt for choice and ended up going for a sort of more general, all-encompassing but fundamental thing. So I'm happy, more happy than I thought I would be doing The Keeper of Traken, and that is and as I say, there's no artifice here. I am not squeezing myself round corners or contorting myself into positivity in order to pretend I like something I don't. I genuinely enjoyed that. I genuinely thought it was very good. I thought, yes, the fact that it has a sort of staginess that wouldn't really be transmittable today because we're so we deify, in inverted commas, realism, because it's nothing is real. People don't talk the way they talk in drama. I mean, God, not these days either, because otherwise everybody would bloody whisper. But that's another thing. Yes, this may be too declamatory for today's tastes, but I take that over today's whispering. And you can be big and theatrical and still be truthful. It is a method of conveying plot and character that just because it is perhaps seen more because it is it has its its basis in the theatre doesn't mean it's any less truthful. Theatre acting is very, very truthful. It is just a different. The vessel is inhabited in a slightly different way and comports itself in a different way. And I say that about the production as well. I'm not just talking about the acting with this. It's the whole production is probably too artificial for today's tastes. But that's only in its realization, not in what it's trying to do. And that's just a matter of that's how things were done in those days, and the audience clocked that and put it to one side because they knew we all know we're watching something that isn't real, but unfortunately now if we get a slight inkling of it, we loftily take ourselves out of the drama and go, oh, well, I'm not bought into it anymore because they haven't done all the work for me. So I think we were better in the old days. But yes, good. I enjoyed that. I hope you did too, and I hope you will join me and Dr. Tom next time we take a trip to check in on The Keeper of Traken. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Dr. Tom Attah, who can be found on Twitter at Tom Attah, TOMATTAH. I'm grateful to Tom and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Roger 1966, Murray Robertson, Richard Riley, Sean Reynolds, Paula Reynolds, Peter Reed, Ian Radford, Liam Price, Kitty Placati, Shane Plays, Steve Phillips, John Pettigrew, Ken Patterson, Richard Patey, Phil Pascoe, James Parsons, Andy Parkinson, Russell Parker, Mark Trevor Owen, Runa Brutig Olsen, Neil O, Jeremiah O'Connor, Steve O'Brien, Tom Neenan, Andrew Nixon, Paul Murphy, Chris Murphy, Mia Murch, Sheila Moore, Ian Moore, Brandon Moore, and Jim Mooney. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name read out on the credits, like what I just read out on the credits there, you can go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock. It is one of the bonuses of being a patron. Other bonuses include advance releases. Hopefully soon Happy Times and Places will be back to being 6 months ahead of The Great Unwashed. And Too Much Information, one of the other podcasts, is a couple, 2 or 3 episodes ahead. And Indefinable Magic, you get those early as well. All the podcasts basically come early. Some are also exclusive to patrons. One called Far Too Much Information, which revels in even more arcana than Too Much Information, and monthly AMAs, and also little behind-the-scenes videos and pictures and insights into the making of the Blu-ray extras that I'm involved with. So lots of bonus content, lots of early content, and usually about 3 releases a week as well. So plenty of content for £3 a month, which is the lowest tier. You can go higher if you want, and you get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in one go. If you don't want a monthly commitment, you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock and make a donation if I sound particularly hungry, or I've done a podcast that you've particularly enjoyed, coinciding with a time where you're feeling especially flush. But if you are unable to do the financial side of things, that's absolutely fine. I'm very grateful to you for listening, but if you could just give me a little bit of your time and go to YouTube and iTunes and Apple and Podbean and Spotify and anywhere that you get these things, and give a thumbs up, like and subscribe. A 5-star rating is really, really helpful, and a couple of lines of review saying what you like. That just helps tweak the algorithm and enable these podcasts to be seen by more people who may be interested in them. I'm on social media, Twitter @Toby Haydock, also @Haydock Podcasts for tweets just about these podcasts if you're not interested in the comedy, what I do. If you are, well, also follow my comedy club, XS Malarkey, @XS Malarkey. That is also on Instagram @XS Malarkey, as am I @Toby.Haydock. And I also have a Facebook page, XS Malarkey does too. So we're all over the social medias, so come and find us there. And there we go. I had a lovely night at XS Malarkey last night, actually, and a comedian called Laura Davis, who is an Australian comedian, did describe it as the best comedy night in the world. And Laura's travelled the world. Laura is from Australia, and Laura is not alone in describing XS Malarkey as the best comedy club in the world, because Joe Lycett did too, and has done on several occasions. So if that's not a recommendation, I don't know what is. But I'm jolly chuffed, actually, to have enjoyed Keeper of Traken. I might not have done yesterday. I was in a gloomy mood yesterday. I feel much better today. Isn't it funny? Yeah, I'm enjoying what I watched Keeper of Traken. I seem to recall watching a lot of these stories in front of a roaring fire. Maybe I'll talk about that when I didn't run out of things to say then, though, did I? I thought I might. And I didn't. Let's see if I can keep full steam ahead for the remaining 3 episodes. I do have a lot of memories of it at the time. Anyway, what joy. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry if you picked up the occasional dog bark, or there's a sort of chime that we've got whenever walks past our doorbell. It gives a sort of that I've programmed it to do, and it's supposed to tell you if somebody's at the door, but because I leave the porch doors open, it just means if a piece of tumbleweed goes past, it activates it. And as somebody that's used to conjuring tumbleweed just by my comedic performances, we get quite a lot.